The Judicial Service Commission meets next week to interview candidates for a range of positions in Superior Court. The JSC will also interview candidates for the Mpumalanga and Gauteng High Courts. We now speak to legal expert Chris Oxtoby. Chris, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. What do we need to understand about this round?
Well, a few things. It's an important round because of some of the vacancies that are being interviewed for. In addition to the ones you've mentioned, the position to head the Supreme Court of Appeal is being interviewed. That obviously, as the second highest court in the country, is really important. And then I think there's a broader question to watch about how the interviews are conducted generally. Now, the JSC has been criticised for a long time for not following and not making public sufficiently detailed criteria for what it's actually looking for in the candidates that it interviews. And at the end of last year, they in fact released a document setting out this kind of information in a lot more detail. So it's going to be a really important thing to watch what role that plays in these interviews and the kind of impact that might have on hopefully making the process better.
We'll get into some of the candidates in a few moments, but there are concerns that have been raised that the JSC has been unable to shortlist enough candidates for a position on the Constitutional Court, which has been open since 2021.
Yes, I mean that is a major concern. It's not at all a good state of affairs for the country's highest court to have a vacancy standing open that long. I don't think it's good for the functioning and the continuity of the court. It's not a good situation to have to be appointing people on a temporary basis to fill the position. And it's also perhaps most concerning for what it suggests about the confidence that judges themselves have in the appointment process. This is the second time in a row, 2 rounds of the JSC sitting in a row, that this vacancy has been advertised and there haven't been enough candidates. So that's a major concern, and I think that's why watching the process next week, watching the kind of questions that are asked, watching how the JSC conducts itself is a really important step to hopefully rebuilding some confidence in how the Commission does its work, so that hopefully in future these vacancies are in fact able to be filled.
What does that speak to? Is South Africa going through a shortage of capable candidates that can come forward? Because we understand the Labour and the Labour Appeal Court position has also been vacant for some 5 years.
That's right, and I don't think it is a problem of a shortage of candidates. It's an issue that has occurred on and off for on many occasions over the past decade, and those of us watching the JSC have speculated about why it might be that judges are not prepared to put themselves forward. Many different explanations have been put forward, but I think at the moment, if one looks at what's happened in the last couple of years, it's very difficult to come to any conclusion other than that judges have looked at the interview process. I'm thinking of the interviews in 2021, which were so problematic that they were actually rerun on the threat of litigation, and the JSC actually redid the interviews rather than face a legal challenge in court. We had all the controversy at the interviews of for the new Chief Justice position at the beginning of last year. And we then had, in April last year, 2 vacancies being interviewed, but the JSC only putting forward enough candidates for 1 appointment to be made. And again, there was controversy particularly about the treatment of Judge Unterhalter, one of the candidates who was overlooked. I think it's very difficult not to look at that timeline and imagine that the judges are looking at this process and thinking that it's not one that they want to subject themselves to. I think we do have the talent. We do have many candidates who would be capable of being appointed to that position, and I think they're simply not willing to put themselves through what has been a very problematic process. So again, that's why seeing how the JSC deals with the question of criteria, how it manages its process next week, is so important to hopefully going a long way to restoring some of that confidence.
A brave soul by the name of Justice Mahube Molemela wants to put themselves through this process because that's the name that President Cyril Ramaphosa nominated for the Supreme Court of Appeal position. Who is Justice Mahube Molemela? What do we need to know about him?
Well, she is an experienced judge. She's been a judge of the Supreme Court of Appeal since 2018. So she's been on that court for going on for 5 years. And prior to that, she was the judge president, so in other words, the head of the Free State High Court. So she has leadership experience. She has a decent amount of experience on the appeal court. I think one of the most interesting things to me about her is that in legal circles, she has she's very well known as someone who writes dissenting judgments quite often and is quite willing to disagree with her colleagues on the appeal court. So that speaks to someone who certainly seems to have an independent mind and is not afraid to express that and take different views from her colleagues. How her leadership style will play out at the SCA is an interesting question to consider. It's something I'm sure the JSC is going to explore. Over the past few years, a lot of interviews of candidates for the appeal court have really focused on the collegiality or the alleged lack of collegiality and internal tensions in that court. So I expect that she is going to get a lot of questions about how she will manage those dynamics to the extent that they are still a problem in that court. But I think she's a credible candidate. She's a strong candidate. And I think it's also important to point out that as a woman, her appointment addresses a very significant gap in leadership positions in the judiciary, where there are very few other women in these kind of positions heading courts. And she would, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, she would only be the second female judge to currently be in what they call a head of court position, along with the Deputy Chief Justice Mandisa Maya. So from that point of view, the appointment is significant. I expect her to get asked a lot of things. I don't expect the JSC to take a different view about appointing her. The President has put her forward as his preferred candidate. I think she'll be asked a wide range of questions, but I think it's very unlikely that the JSC does anything else other than agree that she'd be a suitable candidate to be appointed.
What's the one question you're looking forward to hearing the most?
I'm looking forward to any question that links back to the criteria that the JSC announced at the end of last year. I would take any question across that range because it would show to me that these criteria are indeed going to be adopted and are going to form part of the JSC's work and practice going forward. That would be a win.
Legal expert Chris Oxtoby, thank you very much for your time.